All right. So the next section that will be included in your portfolio that you'll upload to the website application after the teaching statement is a description of your Ohio State teaching responsibilities. So what does that mean? I mean, ultimately, it's a description of the teaching you've done at Ohio State. What courses have you taught? What were your responsibilities? Were you the grader? Were you a recitation leader? Were you the instructor of record? It provides context for your application portfolio. The kinds of activities and ideas you're able to implement when you are supporting in a supporting role as a recitation leader, for example, are very different than if you are an instructor of record. All right. It serves as a reference guide for reviewers. So it's very much when you include an artifact and say, this is from the course that I taught on X, Y, and Z, then that experience should be referenced in your teaching responsibilities. So it's really sort of a directory, right, as your committee members read through the rest of the information that you're providing them. So your Ohio State teaching responsibilities should include what your responsibilities were for the course, a brief description of the course, who the students were who are enrolled in the course, and what types of teaching methods and strategies did you generally use. And what I'll go ahead and point out here is that it is not the case that you have to have taught a certain amount to win, right? Or to have a certain kind of responsibility to win. That's certainly not the case, and that's not the way the competition is organized. You know, the committee members are really looking for excellence in performing the duties that you were assigned. So this is not, this part of the application is not, an automatic weed out feature. It's really for helping the committee members understand a rich picture of who you are as a teacher and the opportunities that you've had and what you've decided to do with those opportunities. So on the left-hand side of the slide, you see how the description of a teaching responsibility might look on a CV. So you see it's very brief. It's organized by chronologically. So in spring 2003, the title is bolded. You have the course name and number. And then you have a very kind of bulleted list, right? Help design course syllabus, planned lessons, created assignments, etc. On the right-hand side of the slide, you see the slightly expanded version that we'd really prefer to see in an application portfolio, or at least that will give your selection committee more details that will help them see the richness that you bring to teaching at Ohio State. So, introductory information is extremely similar, right? This applicant decided to write the description of teaching responsibilities in narrative sentence form. You don't have to, but it's a choice you can make that you can make in this teaching portfolio option that you would not do on a CV. And you can see there's more detail, right? So it's a graduate level course. There were 20 students from 17 departments. Some information about the course content, right? Focused on issues such as student learning styles, etc. As the TA, I helped design the syllabus and daily lesson plans. So we get a much richer sense about who you are as a teacher. Some questions that we often get at this point about the teaching responsibilities are: how do I best organize my experiences? All right, so do I have to organize this by course or by date or by role or responsibilities? And I'm going to recommend that you follow a similar logic as to what you'll often hear recommended for many application documents, and that is, in order of impressiveness, for lack of a better word, right? So, if what you will be referencing the most often in the rest of your teaching portfolio is the class where you were the instructor of record, even if that was a couple years ago. But that's really where you feel like so many of your examples are drawn from as a teacher. Then you may want to lead with that, right? So the most responsibility, then to decreasing amounts of responsibility. If it makes more sense, the way that you're telling the story of you as a teacher, to do it in reverse chronological order, then by all means, right? Start with your most recent course that you've taught, and then the semester prior to that, and the semester prior to that. Or, for example, if you've taught multiple sections of the same course number, right? So you've taught lots of 2367s, but every time you've taught it, it's had different readings and different students, and then go ahead and list those out separately. Just because they have the same course number does not mean that you have to only include that as one teaching experience, right? So you really want it to be, again, this is sort of an index for your committee members to read through and kind of see a quick boiled down timeline of your experience here at Ohio State. And so you want to organize it in a way that's meaningful at a quick glance. Okay. How do I organize the narrative of my teaching responsibility? Do I make it bullet points? Do I use full sentences? Do I use a blend? It's up to you. It's really about readability. So if you have lots of teaching experience and you're still having to try and get it onto those 1 to 2 pages, then you may need to abbreviate more of the descriptions of your classes than somebody who perhaps is taught twice and who can really go into some more narrative detail. But it's, again, it's that selective versus representative. You don't want to lose information that your committee will find helpful or interesting. But it also can't be exhaustive. All right. The question we often get is, what if I taught one course numerous times? And I alluded to that already. It depends is always our first answer at UCAT. And, if it depends on how similar those experiences are. And how unreadable or readable it is for your committee members to see those experiences lumped together in one information item or really spelled out individually. Should I include teaching outside of Ohio State? Well, we've talked about how in other settings, if you want to mention prior teaching experiences in your teaching statement, for example, and how you've continued to develop as a teacher, then that's fine. But here, we do want it's your Ohio State teaching responsibilities. So for the purposes of this section, we're going to ask that you really stick to your Ohio State teaching experience. And that includes, that also precludes, right? So really focus the classes for which you have held an appointment here at Ohio State. So if you have been teaching in Columbus while you've been at Ohio State, that may shape who you are as a teacher in ways that you want to reference in your teaching portfolio, but it would not be included on this list of Ohio State teaching responsibilities. And the final question is often, should I include non-classroom teaching experiences at Ohio State? So this may be mentoring. This may be, teaching procedures to undergraduates in the lab. This may be, sometimes folks mean, office hours, right? And, if it is something that you can formalize, then it belongs in this section, right? If it's something that's more informal, then it's worth mentioning in other sections, but it doesn't carry quite the same weight, right? So some of why we started this section comparing this description of responsibilities with the description on your CV is because that's sort of the level that we're thinking about with this. So if you could include it as a line on your CV, then it makes sense to include it in this section as well. But if it's sort of too informal to really be considered something that you'd feel comfortable putting as a line on your CV, then it may be something that you reference in other parts of your portfolio, but it's probably not something you should include in this section.